worked in the AWA for a little bit. How was your dad and Verne, their booking? How would you compare them?
Well, Verne didn't go to Amarillo, Texas, and Chattanooga, Tennessee, and the crazy, wild kind of places. Verne was a college graduate, Minnesota. He worked some in New York, so his booking was a little more traditional, down to earth. If someone was the champion, then he would create some thing or way for the challenger to get on TV and make a reasonable story. But as far as like chain matches and the cage matches and bull rope matches and the wild, crazy stuff that we did in Florida, Verne was just a much more subdued. Later on, he had to pick up the pace or fall behind. But the good thing Verne had was snow. Because when it's snowing outside, there is nothing to do. Mm-hmm. So he had a captive audience with a good TV show, good-looking athletes, credibility. He had been in the Minnesota, and he only had was huge, huge cities. Mm-hmm. He didn't go to little cities like Arcadia and and all that kind of stuff. He worked San Francisco, Denver, Minneapolis, Winnipeg. Yeah, he worked in the big, big cities with huge population, and basically in the winter, summertime, they didn't do hardly any business because they had 2 months to be out on a lake or fishing or doing something. So their big season, when they got all 90% of their income was all in the winter months. When people were cramped up, sitting in a house, couldn't get out, well, they, of course, had all indoor buildings and all that kind of stuff. So it gave the people something to do. Mm-hmm. But just because Verne was much mellower than my dad, wasn't crazy, just different personality denotes different ways things are booked and how they're handled.
Early memories of Lex Luger.
Dumbass from day one.
Really?
Yeah, dumbass from day one. He was the epic big man syndrome. Just because he had some muscles, he thought that people should really think he was good. He failed as a football player. He failed as everything he ever tried to do. The only reason he made it in wrestling is because he was a good opponent. He was wrestling Ric Flair. He couldn't go in the ring. If you didn't have Luger's tools, he looked great. Cannot take that away from him. He looked great. Big arms, lean, but his head never did quite get in the process. And he was always a good challenger. He was always a good opponent for the Ric Flairs and Rick Rhodes and the guys that could get in the ring and really get the job done. Luger always thought because he had big muscles, you were supposed to be afraid of him, or because he did this, or because he was taller than you were supposed to not do certain things. And he always had this misconception of what wrestling was about. And, he was one of the guys that made a lot of money running on somebody else's coattails.
Mm. Why do you think the territory was so successful, Florida?
Well, back in the day, it was almost before my dad started the territory, before there was a professional football team or a baseball team or a basketball team or a hockey team. It was before Outback Steakhouse and all the restaurant chains and all that kind of stuff. My dad kept everything extremely real. People like violence. They don't go to a stock car race because of the type of cam and the tire compound and the shock absorbers and the way the suspensions are set. They go to see a crash. Everybody wants to see cars crash. People like violence. They like to get out and they could go to the wrestling matches and scream and yell and cuss and see good versus evil, and it was an event. It was a recreational ventilation system that when they left that building that night, they were going, man, they weren't mad at their boss at the job the next day. They got all their frustration out, and in a very real manner. Like my dad used to say, it's a mental and physical game of chess, was the way he looked at a wrestling match. And it was successful because he kept everything real. No stupid fantasy stuff, no fireworks, no comedy acts, he kept it very real, and he kept it very competitive, and good TVs, good athletes, well respected in the community all over Florida. He was one of the founders of the Florida Sheriff's Boys Ranch. Dory Funk Sr. had started the Sheriff's Ranch in Amarillo back in the 50s, and Dad saw how that worked and the opportunities and everything that it gave Dory Sr. So when Dad came to Florida and wanted to change his image from the villain that was hated to a good community guy, that was one of the things he did. He got with the sheriff of Tampa, Ed Blackburn at the time, and then Ed, of course, knew the sheriffs all around, and they started the Florida Sheriff's Boys Ranch. Now it's huge, Florida Sheriff's Boys Ranch in Girls Villa, and they've got 8 or 10 or 15 different places in Florida. When it first started, there was one in Live Oak. That was where the Boys Ranch was. So Dad got in the community. He had good TV. He kept everything very real, and he kept everything very violent.
There we go. Sex and violence.
Huh?
Sex and violence.
Yeah.
Themselves.
Yes, that's it. Sex and, he left the sex out.
Yeah.
He went hardcore for violence.
Okay.
Yeah.
How hard was it on you and your dad when Dusty jumped, when he left you guys?
Well, Dad had it kind of broke my dad's heart in that he had given Dusty part of the Florida territory for free in hopes that Dusty would, okay, if he was going to go to Atlanta and work some, but that he would spend time, and Dad had spent years getting Dusty over and creating Dusty Rhodes and all that kind of stuff. So when Jimmy Crockett wanted to compete against Vince, and he got in touch with Dusty, well, Dad couldn't very well get mad at him because he was going to pay more money. We got a short-term deal going on here. Dad didn't spite anyone for making money, but when Dusty left, he took Barry, he took Magnum, he took Ron Bass, he took half the territory with him. And that really made Dad mad, because here he spent 5 or 6 years giving Dusty the opportunity to create the American Dream character and live it out and give him part of the territory and give him part of the building in Orlando and all that kind of stuff as perks and bonuses. And then when Dusty left, it was like he was almost trying to kill the territory for taking all the talent with him. So, that wasn't a good thing, but you can't spite him for going. If they were making, $100,000 in Florida, and they could go work up for Crockett and make 200. The heck, that's what we're all here for. We're all here trying to earn a living. So Dad just thought he should have done it a different way. That he shouldn't have taken the guys with him. That he shouldn't have, if they wanted to go on their own, or if Crockett wanted to get in touch with them or whatever. But Dusty in the dressing room and in my dad's territory handpicked the guys, his crew, that he wanted to take with him when he made his jump to Crockett. So that made Dad angry.
Do you take it personally? I guess feel a little
Probably,
personal?
yeah, probably did. We never talked that much about it because Dad was he kept everything bottled up. He was very tight-mouthed.
Watch
Never
thousands of exclusive shoot interviews
talked
right
about
now
problems
on
or any of that kind of stuff. I guess he figured his shoulders